Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by a Hockey Boy Nate. In this video, we're going to be discussing three major areas here that could make impacts for North America. We have Tropical Depression Fred, which is continuing to create a widespread tornado risk for the eastern portions of the United States. We also have Tropical Storm Grace down here south of Cuba towards the Cayman Islands, and how that could potentially become a hurricane within the hour or maybe even the next 6 hours as this thing continues to intensify rather significantly. We also have Tropical Storm Henri south of Bermuda and how that could potentially be making impacts towards the East Coast. And so if you guys are new to my channel, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you are new as well, turn on notifications to stay up to date with all the latest information, as well as share this video with friends and family and on social media. That would be greatly appreciated. Of course, for the best information, please go to the National Hurricane Center as well as your local weather offices for any sort of updated information. We're going to start out with Tropical Depression Fred up here in the East Coast, but just for reference, Grace is down here south of Cuba, and Henri is south of Bermuda, just for reference here on satellite imagery. So here's Tropical Depression Fred, or at least the remnants of Fred. You can see the whole counterclockwise spin in the atmosphere with this, indicating that it is a low pressure system. This outer band right here is going to be causing the main tornado risk, and it'll continue to create those outer bands as it continues to propagate northeastward towards the general vicinity of the northeast. Taking a look at what happened yesterday, I was talking about how this is going to continue to create tornado impacts, and we actually had 10 tornado reports from Georgia into South Carolina and North Carolina, as well as some wind damage reports across the board from potential wind gusts within those outer bands too. So a widespread severe weather risk that is possible within the storm, and this does qualify as a tornado outbreak. So very interesting to see here from Fred. The day one tornado outlook here, we have a 2% chance of tornadoes within a 25-mile radius indicated in green, extending as far north as New York and as far south as Virginia. It does include places like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and West Virginia as well. So places over there need to watch out. And then right in the middle, that brown area is that 5% chance for tornadoes within a 25-mile radius. It does include the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, northern Virginia, eastern and central portions of Maryland, with the exception of Delmarva, as well as central to southern Pennsylvania. So if you guys live over there, I would highly advise staying tuned to your local weather office. If you guys do get any sort of warning, please heed it and head into the lowest innermost part of your building, particularly a bathroom or a closet. Taking a look at the simulated radar here from the NAM 3 kilometer, if you do want to stay tuned to the timings of this event, on the left-hand side here is the time detailed in Eastern Daylight Time, already translated for you all. It just so happens that I live on the East Coast, or I live here along the eastern side of the United States, so I'm in this time zone as well. But by looking at it as it continues to propagate further and further in towards the early morning or the late morning, early afternoon hours, you can see that line starts to kind of disintegrate a bit more. And a lot of people are questioning as to where this line could potentially reinitiate again. But then as this gets in towards the afternoon hours, this new band of storms start to form here in the southwestern portions of Pennsylvania, in just the general vicinity of the Appalachians, and really starts to consolidate. You can see this massive line of storms that begin to form just to the west of State College, all the way down towards the area near Altoona, and this will continue to propagate eastward and potentially create a widespread tornado event off of that. And it'll continue to go all the way through into the late afternoon, into the early evening hours, even into the overnight hours, as this continues to head past Harrisburg into the Allentown areas and eventually off towards the border of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So really got to watch out for that here for today. And then even tomorrow, you can even be talking about potential tornado risks across New England. So people up in New England definitely need to watch out for Fred as well. All right, let's move off to Tropical Storm Grace here. Tropical Storm Grace at the moment is a 65-mile-per-hour maximum sustained storm with a minimum pressure of 993 millibars moving west-northwest at 16 miles per hour. That advisory was given at 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so in the future it most likely will change due to the fact that Reconnaissance has found stronger winds towards the center of Grace. You can see right here is the Cayman Islands, right here is the outline of Cuba, this is Jamaica, and this is the Yucatan Peninsula. And as this continues to propagate in that same direction of west-northwest, you can see how this has a massive comma head shape to it, with the center area of low pressure, even seeing on satellite, you can see it rotate right in the center, right about there. And that shows that this thing may be developing an inner core as this continues to propagate towards that general vicinity of the Yucatan. Most of the showers and thunderstorm activity on the southeastern side have been showing hurricane force winds, and once those showers and thunderstorms get slung around the actual tropical system, then we could talk about this thing becoming a bit more symmetrical and potentially even developing an eye and rapidly intensifying towards the Yucatan Peninsula. But as of right now, there is a high probability that it could potentially do so, and there's a high probability that at this time, even as we are talking, that it could even potentially be a hurricane. Looking at the water vapor imagery at the bottom part of your screen, you can see it's starting to kind of glitch out a little bit, and so the satellite might be encountering some technical difficulties, but you can still see that we have this trough right here just to the north of it, inhibiting a little bit of westerly shear across the northern portion of the storm. But because it has grown such expansively within a short period of time, it's kind of slicing that trough in half and basically pushing away most of that shear. So it's not anticipated that that shear will inhibit on the storm at any way, shape, or form. However, we do have this ridge that's in the northern portion of the Gulf of Mexico that's starting to develop, and that'll basically guide Grace as it continues to move towards the Yucatan and most likely stay in the southern portions of the Gulf of Mexico. So it's not really expected to make landfall as it continues to move on through, and the National Hurricane Center forecast cone actually does agree with that, with a hurricane warning being issued for places near the Yucatan and eventually ending up into the Bay of Campeche, even as a hurricane as it continues to move on through. You can see here the Cayman Islands, tropical storm warnings have been issued. Hurricane watches have also been issued around it in the off chance that it does rapidly intensify within that short period of time. We also have tropical storm watches in the northern portions of Cuba, and then outlined in that red highlighter along the Yucatan, that is your hurricane warning right within there, and then these blue highlighters are tropical storm warnings as well. According to this forecast cone, they're still saying that by tonight it is still expected to be a tropical storm. However, in my personal opinion, I think it'll be a hurricane much earlier than what they actually think, which will be tomorrow morning. I think it'll be a hurricane by tonight comes around, and as it continues to propagate towards the Yucatan, we could be potentially talking about a Category 1 to maybe even a Category 2 hurricane as it makes landfall. Then once it encounters land, most of the thunderstorm activity will be disrupted, and so it will probably weaken either back into a tropical storm or a low-end Category 1 hurricane before it eventually continues to move off into the Bay of Campeche, and then it will most likely re-intensify into a hurricane as it moves on through. Looking at the aircraft reconnaissance data, I'm going to refresh my page and see if I can find anything new. And just by looking at this, obviously you can see where the lower level circulation and the mid-level circulation is actually lined up. It'll be right about here. And it's actually been, well, when I mean the hurricane hunters have actually been encountering a lot of hurricane force winds at flight level. Of course, they are a mile above the ocean surface, but they are encountering a lot of hurricane force winds here within this general vicinity. And whether or not those hurricane force winds can translate to the ground, which there could be some instances where it actually does, then we could be talking about a hurricane out of the system. And the one thing about this is that this storm has actually been producing some relatively low pressure amounts with the amount of strong damaging winds, sustained winds, I should say, from the storm. So rapid intensification is definitely possible with all of this as it continues to move on through. And just by looking at the raw data here, on the top right-hand side is the actual surface plot for the sustained winds. This blue line as it goes up and down, this is your wind speeds. And on the right-hand side, that is your wind speeds in knots. And you can see the blue line actually approach the 60 knot range right here, which translates to 70 miles per hour. So I would anticipate that in the next update at 11 o'clock, they will most likely increase this to a 70 mile per hour tropical storm at minimum. And the reason why I say that is because there's also another Hurricane Hunter aircraft that is in this as well. And they have also seen that same range here of 60 knot winds, 70 miles per hour. And so really interesting to say the least as to how they are approaching Tropical Storm Grace. You can also take a look at microwave imagery in case if it's a bit harder to tell, but the storm is developing a inner core. You can see it's starting to develop in a little bit of an inner eye wall as this continues to propagate further towards the west. Of course, we have the satellite imagery kind of cutting the storm in half, so we can't exactly see as to what is happening on the western side of the storm, but we have a lot of this deep convection here indicated in yellow and red, and even the dark red, deep thunderstorm activity that is indicating very strong thunderstorms with very strong gusty winds. And so as I mentioned earlier, if this can wrap around fully that yellow and red all the way around the center area of low pressure and form a very well-defined inner core, we could be talking about a very strong eye wall and how this could potentially be even rapidly intensifying as it gets further and further to the west. Now, if we take a look at the weather stations on Cayman Island, we can see that there is some sustained winds in upwards of 44 miles per hour, so they are currently encountering some tropical storm force winds across the board there. Might even be stronger in some wind gusts. And so definitely one of those things to where if you're still in the Cayman Islands, highly recommend that you continue to shelter as much as possible. So if we take a look at the models here, the GFS 500 millibar geopotential height and the cyclonic vorticity shaded in all of this yellow, orange, and red, the cyclonic vorticity indicating tropical activity. And so you can see here is Grace south of Cuba, and we have a lot of this shear that's trying to inhibit it just a little bit because of this trough. But as I said, that trough is not really going to impact it a whole lot. But what's most likely going to impact it more in regards to steering is this ridge that's currently in place right off of the Carolinas. And as this continues to move closer and closer towards the Yucatan Peninsula, that ridge starts to actually move closer and closer towards the Gulf of Mexico. And what happens is the ridge forms wind shear that moves in a clockwise formation. And so if you have wind that's circulating it in a clockwise formation, you're going to have winds that are going to be pushing down from the north and east to the south and west. And because this tropical system is going to want to try and head off into that general vicinity, those winds are basically going to reflect it back and keep it at bay for the most part, putting it into this general forecast of the Yucatan Peninsula into the southern portions of the Bay of Campeche. So that's the reason why it's highly unlikely that this will eventually head off towards the north as it continues to propagate further westward. But by Wednesday evening into Thursday morning, you can see that the actual tropical system, according to the GFS, is very close to to Cozumel and the Yucatan Peninsula, and it actually makes landfall early Thursday morning. But then as it continues to get closer and closer towards the Bay of Campeche, it loses a little bit of its activity, it loses a little bit of its thunderstorms, but then that won't be an issue once it gets back over waters. It'll begin to intensify again, potentially even rather rapidly as it did beforehand, and then it'll make landfall once again in Mexico. Taking a look at the HWRF model, this actually takes into account rapid intensification in some instances. And within the latest guidance here, we can see that the system actually does intensify further and further into a hurricane on its approach towards the Yucatan Peninsula and Cancun. But then it does encounter a bit of land interaction. It loses a bit more of its thunderstorms on the outer side of the storm. And so then it begins to weaken a bit further, maybe not fully down into a tropical storm according to this model, but maybe even into a lower end Category 1 hurricane. And then as it gets back over water, you can see how it really starts to organize again, gets a lot of thunderstorms, and becomes a bit more of a symmetrical storm heading closer and closer towards the coast of Mexico again. So really interesting as to how that will continue to progress. I'm going to take a look at the recon data here once more just to see if anything is updated with any of this activity. And it seems to me as if this the low pressure of this system, according to the latest dropson, is about 994 millibars. So it's about the same as to what the National Hurricane Center has advised for the 993 millibar storm. So it's definitely consistent with the data of the National Hurricane Center at this time. Now let's take a look at Tropical Storm Henri. Of course, the satellite imagery is going to continue to load, but now the actual GIF shows you that this does have a pretty symmetrical aspect to this. You can see all the clouds on the outside of the blobby mess of showers and thunderstorms are actually swirling around this general area, and the center area of low pressure, which most likely will be located right about here. And so this thing also is in the same situation as Grace. Whether or not it can form an inner core and potentially intensify further, that is the big question. But it is a 998 millibar low pressure storm with the maximum sustained winds of 65 miles per hour, moving west at 8 miles per hour. And so one thing here is that even though there is a tropical storm watch for Bermuda, this thing is expected to stay relatively off the coast. There hasn't been a whole lot of rain, so it's just been a lot of gusty winds that have been ongoing with the outer bands of Henri. But very interesting to see based off of satellite imagery as to what all is happening here. If we take a look at the microwave imagery here from the satellite, we can be able to see that this thing is starting to wrap around convection and form an inner core, and you can see a little bit of an eye right here. And so if this thing continues to push that yellow and red all the way around, we could be potentially talking about how this thing could intensify further and maybe even into a hurricane, potentially by late tonight into tomorrow morning. And so very interesting to say the least within the next 5 days as to how this will continue to maintain intensity. The models have been very inconsistent as to how strong this could potentially be, as well as the track with this storm as it continues to propagate westward towards the east coast. But it does look like already that it's already starting to form an inner core, and that it most likely will be turning into a hurricane here relatively soon. Looking at the water vapor imagery, once again, same situation to where the satellite's kind of running out of real estate, so it's cut out about half of the screen. But you can see here that there is a pretty impressive signature here, and it's out practically in the middle of nowhere. You also can see these clouds streaming in from the north, so you have this northerly flow here that's going to be inhibiting a little bit of shear. And you can even see some showers and thunderstorms off to the north and east of Henri that is starting to get sheared out because of that same wind shear. And what's going to happen as this continues to progress is that there will most likely be some relatively decent wind shear that will try to displace most of those showers and thunderstorms around that inner core. But if that inner core does develop and that this thing does intensify further and further, that wind shear most likely will not be a huge contributing factor to the demise of this actual storm. But it all depends upon what happens within the next 6 days here. I know 6 days is a pretty long period of time, but what happens from especially the next 2 days, from now until Thursday, I should say, as to how Henri will continue to move through towards the west and how it will deal with that shear, especially from this ridge that's sitting right over the Carolinas. So as I said, same thing with Grace. If this thing can continue to develop and not be inhibited by the shear, this thing will continue to rapidly develop, potentially even form into a hurricane within the next 24 hours. But then afterwards, you can see here within the GFS as to how this continues to progress. This thing does maintain its shape, and it actually intensifies into a hurricane, and then it moves off along the coast, does not impact anywhere along the Carolinas, but later on in the model, this does seem to make impacts with New England. So big watch out here for New England is that if the GFS model does come into fruition, this could be a very dangerous situation as a potential hurricane could be making landfall up there. Same thing with the HWRF. It's saying almost the exact same thing as the GFS, which is kind of scary as to how consistent the models are actually with this storm. But as this continues to propagate northward, this will end up heading into the general vicinity of New England. You can see how it gets very close to New England before the actual model run loses a lot of its frames. The HWRF only goes out to a specific time period, and so we cannot actually see as to what happens after this, but it gets very close towards New England. And so one of those things where if I have any viewers up in New England, I'm sure I do, you guys really need to watch out for this storm as this continues to progress and how it continues to unfold, because we could be potentially talking about some impacts with the north and east from tropical storm or potentially even Hurricane Henri. Now, one thing I do want to talk about a little bit more in depth, not exactly in depth, I'm going to want to give you all a little bit of a Futurecast, more or less, with what all is happening after all this tropical activity. Most people will probably think that once this all is done and over with, we won't be able to see anything else. But there actually is forecasted to potentially be another area to watch towards the end of the month here. And this could be potentially even impacting all sorts of areas along the eastern seaboard. You can see here is Grace and here is Henri, just for reference as to where we are. This is about Friday as to the positioning as to where all these storms are actually at. And as this continues to get closer and closer towards the end of the month, here we're at August 25th, and we have a lot of convection that's starting to develop here along portions of the Caribbean. And whether or not that convection can create a lot of convergence will be the big question here. And so, according to the GFS model, this thing does actually produce a lot of convection, and you'll actually see as to how this develops a general low pressure system. But then we also have another blob of convection that forms here towards the latter stages of next week. So mid stages to latter stages of next week, within the time frame of the 24th to the 26th, we could be talking about another area to watch, or two new areas to watch, as this continues to further head towards the west. And as we push through the model, you can see how there actually is multiple areas of low pressures that begin to form, one a bit more discombobulated than the other, but still areas to watch for sure. And how that continues to unfold, we'll have to see. Of course, at this part of the model, nothing is ever concrete. As a matter of fact, nothing in the models are ever concrete. Things are subject to change. But of course, it's still some areas that we do need to pay attention to. That's going to be it for me, guys. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, and share this with friends and family and on social media. I most likely could be live streaming later on tonight for the potential storm chase of Tropical Depression Fred and how it's creating a widespread tornado event. So if you are excited for that, please be sure to turn on notifications. If I'm not storm chasing, then I will have my tropical update at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and I will continue to have my tropical updates from now until the end of hurricane season. Of course, if there is any sort of information that you would want to learn, please be sure to ask in the comments. And if you do need to seek for more information, go to the National Hurricane Center in your local weather office. As I said, that's going to be it. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.